So what I'd like to do is look at the particular structure of the Unlock DAO.
Yes.
So can you explain the flow of the governance process and then walk us through on screen the technical stack that implements each phase of this governance?
I don't know if I can do the on-screen part, but I can definitely,
Okay.
but I can definitely explain what that is and how this works. So, as I said, Unlock, we have a governance token called UDT, and different people have different amounts of UDT. That's the first step. Oh, the prerequisites, not even a step. The first step actually is to what we say delegate. The core idea here is like, even though a lot of people have tokens, we're not going to ask all of people to vote all the time on every single decision that the DAO might take. So there is a delegation phase that basically allows anyone who has tokens to say, hey, my votes, which is based on their own tokens, I want them to be accounted for in the decision that somebody makes. So I'm basically pointing to somebody and say, hey, they're going to be my delegate, so I expect that person to vote the way I would vote. And so that means that I don't have to vote every time because that person is going to have the weight, basically, of my vote behind it. Does that make sense? It actually is very similar to how physical democracy works, right? Like in the US, at least, you don't vote for the laws directly. You vote for a bunch of representatives, governors, senators, I think. And then they're the ones who actually vote on laws and budgets and things like this. Similar idea here is like the delegates that you appoint or that you point to are these senators and governors. Maybe one of the differences is like I can change who my delegate is at any point. So I don't have to wait for elections to do that. If today I trust you, Crystal, to be a delegate, I can point to you today. And then a couple of weeks from now, I say, hey, no, Crystal is not doing a great job. I'm going to point to Kevin. I'm sure you would do a great job, but I'm going to point to Kevin. And then I take away my delegation to you and give it to Kevin. What's really important, though, is like only the tokens that are delegated, so only the people that have delegated are accounted for in the voting process. So basically, if you have token or somebody has token and they don't delegate, it's like they're not represented in the final vote, in the final tally, which is, again, very different from how physical democracy works, for example, because if somebody doesn't vote for a governor in their state, the governor is still going to vote on behalf of that person or set the laws on behalf of that person when they get to Washington, D.C. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So first step, delegation. And that is what we're currently expecting people to do in the Unlock space. So that's the first step. Once there is a bunch of delegates, anyone can show up and make what we call a proposal. And a proposal is, again, what I said earlier, a thing that gets executed on chain. So it cannot be Crystal goes and buy eggs. It can only be something on chain is going to happen. So basically, we send funds to this, we execute a transaction to do that, we vote on chain on something else, we upgrade a smart contract, but it needs to be on-chain transactions that people can vote on. So somebody will submit that transaction and say, hey, I want the DAO to do that. Because later on, the transaction gets executed from the DAO contract. So it's like, I want the DAO to send funds to address Y. When the proposal is sent, what starts is what we call the voting period. And that is 8 days right now, where all of the delegates can vote. And basically, they vote either in favor or against the proposal. Say, yes, I want this to be executed, or no, I don't want this to be executed. What matters, again, is that at least, because we set a quorum of 15,000 tokens, at least 15,000 tokens need to be represented, either voting yes or no. So maybe there's a world in which there's like 10,000 yeses and 5,000 no's. The transaction would get executed and move on. If there is 10,000 no's and 5,000 yes, obviously it doesn't get executed. If there is only 5,000 yes and 3,000 no's, we've only have seen 8,000 votes, which means that we do not reach quorum, which means that the transaction is not executed. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the 8 days, we look at like, first, how many votes have been expressed, and it needs to be at least 15,000. Anything more is fine, but if it's below, nothing happens. And it needs to be a majority of yeses. If it's more no's, nothing gets executed. If it's a majority of yes, then we move into the execution period. The execution period is basically happening through what we call a time lock. So there's a duration of, I think, if I remember, a week, but I would have to double check, where the transaction is available for execution, but doesn't get executed, basically. It's kind of a cool down period that allows anyone who basically say, hey, this doesn't work the way I should, I expect it to be, I'm going to leave, I'm going to sell my tokens, or I'm going to do something else. They have some time to do it, basically. So that at the end of this period, anybody can basically say, hey, now it's time, let's execute that transaction. And again, the transaction will only be executed if it was approved, more than quorum number of votes, a majority of yeses, and if it has waited enough time, and I think it's 7 days in the time lock period. Okay? That's how the process works. And again, the execution has to be an on-chain thing. It cannot be, Crystal, go buy a sandwich. It can be address Y, we're going to send some tokens to that address. We're going to vote to that other proposition. We're going to delegate our own votes on to somebody else for another DAO, basically. Make sense?
Okay. Mm-hmm.